My name is Sarah. I'm 33 years old, and I've been married to my husband Andrew for 7 years. We live in a quiet town in Oregon, a place with rolling green hills and cool air all year round. The day we moved here, I believed I had finally found peace after years of struggling with city life. I wasn't expecting a perfect life, just a real home. And for a long time, I thought I had that. Andrew is a quiet but thoughtful man. He's not the overly romantic type, but he listens, helps me with the dishes after dinner, and always remembers to buy the exact tea I like whenever he goes grocery shopping. Those little things made me believe I was in a good marriage. Not thrilling, but solid. But not everything was as smooth as it looked on the outside. The one issue and the biggest thorn in my marriage was Grace, Andrew's older sister. She's 37, lives alone in Seattle, and every time she shows up, chaos follows. Grace has a way of making everything revolve around her. Whether it's a cozy dinner or a weekend picnic, she always finds a way to make herself the center of attention. At first, I thought maybe it was because she wasn't married yet and felt lonely sometimes. I tried to be understanding. I invited her over, cooked her favorite dishes, and many times let her take over the conversation during gatherings just to keep her happy. But patience has its limits. I remember my wedding day so clearly, a day that was supposed to be just about me and Andrew. While everyone was raising their glasses for a toast, Grace suddenly held up her hand and shouted, "I'm engaged!" All eyes turned to her, cameras flashing everywhere, and there I stood, my wedding dress barely fanned out, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't even tasted, trying to keep a smile on my face. Andrew just shrugged and whispered, "You know how she is. She likes to joke around." A joke? If that was a joke, I'd like to know when it ends. A year later, when I got promoted to project supervisor, Andrew threw a small dinner party at home to celebrate. Everyone was having a good time until Grace interrupted with, "I've been seriously thinking about writing a book." Nobody asked, nobody brought it up. She went on and on the whole evening. No one remembered the celebratory cake or why we were even gathered there. I used to tell Andrew about how upset I felt, but every time he would just laugh and say, "Sweetheart, that's just Grace. She doesn't mean anything by it." Right. Grace didn't mean to. Grace just accidentally turned my wedding into an engagement announcement. Grace slipped up and stole the spotlight at my promotion dinner. And Grace coincidentally called right when we were leaving for a holiday trip, just to say she broke up with boyfriend number 14 and needed to talk to Andrew. I started feeling like a guest in my own life. Every time I got close to a meaningful moment, Grace would blow in like a whirlwind and take over all the attention. And Andrew? He kept quietly defending her, like it was second nature. I'm not sure when I started getting suspicious. Maybe it was one evening when I was sitting alone in the living room, listening to Andrew talking to Grace on the phone in the next room. His voice was softer, gentler than when he spoke to me. I sat there, clutching a cold cup of tea, and felt a chill settle in my chest like winter arriving early. I didn't say anything that night, or for a long time after that. But I knew something wasn't right. Things started to go downhill after that evening with the cold tea. I began noticing more, not because I was paranoid, but because Grace kept pushing my limits in ways I'd never imagined. Last Thanksgiving, we hosted at Andrew's place, the first time since we renovated the kitchen. I spent a whole week planning, prepping ingredients, and even learned how to make traditional stuffing from my former mother-in-law over a video call. Everything was perfect. Until Grace walked in, nearly an hour late, in a sparkling red dress, face beaming like she was about to host a live TV show. "Sarah," she beamed, "sorry I'm late. I have exciting news to share." Before I could say a word, she turned to the crowd gathered around the table and shouted, "I made it to the final casting round for a reality show. I might be on TV." The room burst into wows and, "That's amazing," followed by a flood of questions. No one remembered I had just pulled the turkey out of the oven, or that I was about to invite everyone to the table. The dining setup I spent the whole morning arranging became the backdrop to Grace's big announcement. I looked at Andrew, hoping at least this time he would say something, but he just smiled, nodded at his sister, and said, "That's amazing. You did it." I bit my lip. Once again, I was pushed to the sidelines in my own home. Then came my birthday in January. I'm not one for grand celebrations, so I planned a cozy evening with a few close friends. Andrew suggested inviting his family, and I agreed. Didn't want to make it a big deal. I baked the cake, picked the wine, prepared everything thoughtfully. Once everyone was seated and Andrew had just played the happy birthday song, Grace suddenly stood up and raised her glass. "I have something special to share," she said with a bright smile. "I'm thinking about moving to Portugal. Time to change the air and live life to the fullest, right?" The cheerful atmosphere was swallowed up by loud applause and a flurry of questions about her relocation plans. One of my friends even joked, "Oh, wow, Grace is such an inspiration." I stood there, forcing a smile, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. After the party, I asked Andrew, "Don't you think it's strange how every time I have something meaningful going on, Grace always finds a way to interrupt?" He just shook his head and said, "Probably just a coincidence. You know how she is, always impulsive. She doesn't mean anything by it." "You really believe it's not intentional?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He hesitated for a moment. "Grace isn't a bad person. She just likes attention. Don't let it get to you." That was the problem. I didn't want to let it get to me. I had tried so hard to let things slide, to excuse Grace the way Andrew always did. But over time, her antics became more calculated, harder to tell apart from pure accident or deliberate intent. Then came the most important event of the year, my debut interior design collection at a local exhibition. It was a dream I'd pursued since college, and I had worked tirelessly for 11 months to bring it to life. Andrew came with me, along with a few close friends. I even invited his mother. She had always supported me. Grace declined, saying she had a team meeting. I was relieved. Honestly, I felt lighter not having to worry about her ruining the launch. But right in the middle of the event, while I was being interviewed by a local magazine reporter, Grace walked in. This time with a man who looked very much like a director, carrying a mini camcorder and scanning the room like he was hunting for the best camera angle. I tried to stay calm and continued answering questions, but as soon as the interview ended, Grace pulled me aside and whispered, "You know, this guy is the director of a documentary series about creative women in the Northwest. I thought, if you had time, maybe he'd be interested in you too." I froze. She had shown up, disrupted everything I worked for, and acted like she was helping. As if she were offering me an opportunity. As if this event, 11 months of my effort, was merely a backdrop for her to perform a new role. That night, as Andrew and I sat in the car heading home, I said nothing. But in my mind, everything started falling into place, like puzzle pieces finally finding their fit. Grace wasn't just selfish. And Andrew wasn't just an easygoing older brother. There was something deeper, stranger, and I needed to know the truth. I will never forget that evening, my 33rd birthday. After months of working nonstop on a project, on top of Grace repeatedly ruining important moments in my life, I didn't have high expectations for my birthday. Honestly, all I wanted was a peaceful night, a few close friends, some soft jazz, and a chocolate cake I made myself. But Andrew insisted on hosting a small party at home. He promised he'd take care of everything: guests, decorations, food. "All you have to do is sit back and enjoy," he said, with a look that made me nod even though I still had doubts. I tried to believe him one more time. I wanted to believe that, despite everything before, my birthday, for once, would be about me. That evening, the house felt warm and lovely. Soft yellow lighting, gentle piano music filling the living room. My friends showed up, bringing small gifts and heartfelt wishes. I wore my favorite navy blue dress, hair in a loose bun, feeling at ease in my own skin after a long stretch of stress. Grace arrived late, as always. She walked in wearing a floor-length white dress and a suspiciously bright smile. I'd learned not to expect her to respect my space, but that night, I was determined not to let her ruin my mood. Everything seemed peaceful, until the moment I picked up the knife to cut the cake in the center of the table. Andrew had just raised his phone to take a picture when Grace spoke up. Louder than the music. "Wait, before you cut the cake, I have something super important to share." I looked at her, the knife still hovering midair. A bitter feeling rose in my chest, like I already knew what was coming, but couldn't stop it. "I'm pregnant," Grace shouted, placing her hands on her belly, lips curling into a proud, overly theatrical smile. The room went silent for a second, then erupted with, "Oh my gosh! Congratulations! That's amazing!" I stood there, frozen, still holding the cake knife. The cake, a symbol of my tiny hopes, shattered in spirit before anyone had a slice. I glanced at Andrew. He just shrugged, smiling awkwardly. "You know how she is. She loves surprises." I swallowed hard, forcing a crooked smile, and set the knife down. But inside me, something broke for good. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even disappointment. It was understanding. A part of my mind had finally woken up after a long sleep. 3 weeks earlier, I had accidentally discovered something that made my blood run cold. That day, Andrew was in the shower and I was looking for an old invoice on his laptop to print for our tax report. I never planned to check anything else, until an email popped up in the corner of the screen. Transfer of $2,100, confirmed, sent from Andrew's bank with the recipient's name, Grace. I clicked. Then came a stream of other emails, transactions, messages, call logs, the texts that left me stunned. Grace. Has she started suspecting anything? Andrew, not yet. I deleted everything. You have to be careful. Grace, if it all comes out, just say the baby isn't yours. Andrew's walk handedly in. Sarah won't let it go, but I'll handle it. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the screen, hands icy cold, mind spinning. I just remember the feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Grace wasn't just someone who liked stealing the spotlight. She was having a child with my own husband. I didn't cry right then. The pain was too deep for tears. I just remember standing up, grabbing my coat, and walking out into the cold, rainy night. I walked aimlessly for over an hour, until my mind became clearer than it had ever been. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg, and I definitely wouldn't stay silent. If Grace wanted to steal every moment from me, then I would give her a memory she would never forget. Since that freezing night, I've lived with a quiet fire in my chest. Enough not to burn me alive, but impossible to put out. I no longer sought explanations or apologies from Andrew. I didn't care about the reasons behind Grace's fake hugs. From the second I saw the message, "If it all comes out, just say the baby isn't yours," I knew I was no longer a trusting wife. I was the betrayed woman, and soon to be the one who would end it all. I hired a private investigator just 2 days later. His name was Mike. Early 40s, quiet, eyes sharp as steel, never missing a detail. I gave him everything: Grace's name, her number, Andrew's work schedule, and one request. I want proof. Clear. Undeniable. Mike worked frighteningly fast. Within a week, he sent me a file of photos. Andrew and Grace leaving a roadside motel in Salem, hand in hand, both wearing masks, but not enough to hide the intimacy. Pictures of them dining together, gazing into each other's eyes. Restaurant receipts, hotel bills, and most damning of all, a printout of another bank statement. Andrew had transferred over $25,000 to Grace in 8 months. I printed everything out and arranged it neatly in a black leather folder. It looked like a project report, but inside was the collapse of a family and the birth of the truth. Ugh! I didn't say a word to Andrew. I kept smiling, kept cooking dinner, kept calling to order the birthday cake like nothing had happened. I even bought a new dress, wine-colored, fitting my figure after weeks of sleepless weight loss. I wanted to end my birthday in a special way, not with wishes, but with a blow no one could recover from. That night, I stood in the living room, cake knife in hand, everyone laughing and chatting around me. Grace had announced her pregnancy 20 minutes earlier. She even pretended to blush, her hands gently resting on her belly, playing the expectant mother role so convincingly it was almost laughable. Andrew wore a forced smile the whole time, as if everything was under control. I didn't cut the cake. Instead, I lifted my glass and tapped it lightly, just like Grace always did to steal the spotlight. "Everyone," I said, my voice soft but clear, "I have something I'd like to share too, and I think now is the perfect time." Grace smiled that fake smile, and Andrew looked at me like he had no idea what I was about to do. I stepped toward the table, set down my glass, opened my purse, and took out the black leather folder. "I want to congratulate Grace," I said, "because she's going to be a mother." "That's wonderful. But it would be even more wonderful if everyone knew who the father is." The room went silent, like someone had flipped a switch. I saw Grace's eyes dart nervously, and Andrew's brow began to furrow. I know this might sound shocking, but I'm a fan of transparency. I opened the folder and pulled out the first photo. Grace and Andrew walking into a hotel. A friend standing near me blurted out, "What is this?" I showed the next one of them having dinner, hands touching beneath the table. Then the money transfers, the messages. I didn't say another word, just laid out each piece of evidence like a knife slicing through deception. Grace stepped back, her face pale. This is fake. You made all of this up." "Oh, if I made it up, then I guess the bank did too, and the hotel's security cameras." I placed the folder on the center table. "Anyone can see it for themselves, if they want." Andrew stood frozen. No excuses. No whispering, "She's just joking." Only the raw truth on the table, and a heavy silence that felt endless. One of my friends, Lena, opened the folder, glanced through a few photos, then looked at me, eyes wide. "Oh my God." Grace gasped, turning to Andrew. "Say something. I thought you—" "Shut up." Andrew cut her off, voice hoarse. "She knows everything." She froze, her face white as paper. No one laughed anymore. No more congratulations. Everyone stood there, part stunned, part fascinated, as if watching the final scene of a drama, where the lead's mask finally falls off. Then, Grace suddenly turned and bolted for the door. Andrew stood still for a second, then ran after her, shouting, "Grace, wait!" I watched them go without a flicker of emotion. I turned back, picked up the cake knife, and said calmly, "Well then, shall we cut the cake?" A faint laugh rose somewhere in the room, like a wisp of smoke after a storm. I caught myself a thick slice of cake. And I knew this was only the beginning. I thought the moment Andrew ran out the door after Grace would be the end of everything. I was wrong. Just 10 minutes after they disappeared from my doorstep, a car horn blared outside. Short and urgent. I stepped onto the porch and saw Mr. Charles, Andrew's father, pulling up in his SUV. He stepped out, face flushed, jaw clenched so tight I thought it might explode. "Sarah," he said, voice shaking with anger. "Where are they?" I pointed toward the small alley leading to the main road. "They just ran off. Just left." Charles didn't say another word. He stormed down the sidewalk like a tornado. I followed, confused, barely catching him mutter under his breath, "I can't believe it. My own son." By the time I reached the street, I saw Andrew and Grace standing by his car, arguing furiously. Under the streetlight, Grace no longer looked sweet or gentle like when she'd announced her pregnancy. She was pointing a finger in Andrew's face, eyes blazing with fury. "You promised she would never find out," Grace hissed. "I can't control everything, Grace," Andrew shouted back. And just then Charles arrived. He didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't scold. He just raised his fist and punched Andrew square in the face with a force I didn't think a man over 60 could have. Andrew fell back onto the sidewalk, yelling, blood trickling from his nose. Grace screamed and rushed to help him, while Charles stood still, chest heaving, his face full of disgust. Neighbors began peeking out their doors. Someone must have called the police because less than 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up, red and blue lights flashing across the street. An officer stepped out, asking quickly, "What's going on here?" Andrew, still on the ground, breathing heavily, his shirt stained with blood, groaned, "He hit me." The officer looked at Charles. "Sir, did you do that?" Charles nodded without flinching. "I did, and I don't regret it." The officer sighed, stepping closer. "We'll have to take you in unless the victim decides not to press charges." I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm this man's wife." I pointed at Andrew, then looked at the officer. "And I've been betrayed by both my husband and his sister. What Mr. Charles did was a split-second reaction to the horrific truth that just came to light." Grace yelled, "No one has the right to hit someone over personal matters." But Andrew, at that moment, shook his head. I don't want to press charges. I just want to leave." The officer nodded and motioned for Charles to step back. "You're lucky. Next time, it won't be so easy." Grace helped Andrew to his feet, but he pushed her hand away. "Don't touch me." I noticed that. A small, strange detail, as if suddenly he didn't want to be near her anymore. The two of them got into the car quickly. No words from me, no glance at Charles. Headlights flicked on and the car disappeared into the night, like 2 shadows with nowhere left to hide. I stood there, hands cold despite the light spring breeze. Charles turned to me, placing a firm yet gentle hand on my shoulder. "Sweetheart," he said, "if you need anything, call me." I nodded, lips trembling, knowing I wasn't alone anymore. The next day, I thought maybe I'd find a little peace. I was wrong. An anonymous email appeared in my work inbox at 6:43 a.m. No subject line, no specific address, just one sentence. "So you think you've won?" I sat there, staring at the screen. I didn't need to think hard to guess who sent it. Grace. She wasn't the type to let go easily. I opened the attachment. Inside were clumsily photoshopped images, made to look like I was having private meetings with a male coworker, along with fake text messages spliced together from who knows where. A chill ran down my spine. Grace had started a new game. And I knew one thing for sure: if she wanted a fight, I wouldn't back down. That morning, I got to the office early like I always did, latte in hand and my quarterly report folder under my arm. I never imagined that within 30 minutes, my world would flip in a way that not even my husband's betrayal could compare. As soon as I turned on my computer, the email icon kept blinking. In my inbox was an internal message from HR, bold subject line, "Urgent, immediate in-person meeting, strictly confidential." I was still confused when Mr. Gordon, the head of HR, knocked on my office door and said curtly, "Sarah, come with me. Now." The small conference room at the end of the hall had never felt so cold. Mr. Gordon, a legal representative and a management board member, quietly informed me that the company had received multiple anonymous emails accusing me of harassment, misusing project funds, and creating a hostile work environment. I sat there, frozen. "None of this is true," I said, trying to stay composed. "Who would—" The emails came from 3 different addresses. Mr. Gordon said carefully, with screenshots of internal messages, financial reports, and an anonymous statement from someone claiming to be a former colleague. I nearly dropped my latte. "I've never done anything wrong. These accusations are fabricated," I said, my emotions rising. "We're not drawing any conclusions yet, Sarah," the legal rep added. "But pending investigation, you'll be temporarily suspended. Everything should be cleared up within a few weeks." When I left the meeting room, my mind was spinning like someone had dumped ice water over my head in the middle of winter. I packed up in silence, coworkers, curious eyes stabbing into my back like needles. As I stepped out of the building, a sharp wind brushed my face, and I knew Grace— no, the woman with the angelic face and an icy soul— had made her move. This time, no subtlety, no backstabbing. She wanted to destroy my career. That night, I went through old files, checked every conversation, every expense report I'd ever sent. Everything was clean. But I knew Grace didn't need the truth to write a story. All she needed was doubt. I called Lena, my best friend and colleague who had stood by my side for over 5 years. Her jaw dropped as I told her everything. Grace? She's pulling that again? Sarah, you know. I once heard something from one of her old coworkers in Seattle, and back then I thought it was just a rumor. I froze. What was it? Lena lowered her voice. I heard that a few years ago, Grace got a close friend fired by accusing her of harassing their boss. Everything was anonymous. No one ever confirmed who sent it, but the woman who was accused had her life fall apart for years afterward. I was stunned. Grace wasn't just selfish or jealous. She had a pattern, a track record, destroying people through rumors, through anonymous accusations that left no trace. Lena looked at me intently. I have a friend who used to work with Grace at that company in Seattle. Let me reach out, see if she knows anything else. I nodded, feeling like I was tracking a predator in angel's clothing. 2 days later, Lena texted me just one sentence. You need to meet this woman. She's ready to talk. I arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe near the train station. Her name was Dana. Mid-30s, tired eyes, sunken cheeks, like someone who'd spent too many nights without sleep. When Lena told me about you, I knew immediately who was behind it, Dana said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. Grace didn't just ruin my life. She almost cost me custody of my child. I held my breath. Dana explained that after she broke up with her boyfriend, a former coworker of Grace's, she received anonymous letters accusing her of inappropriate behavior at work, along with doctored private photos. Though there was no hard evidence, the management still fired her to protect the company's reputation. Grace was behind it all, Dana said. Back then I was too scared to speak up, but now I can't let her keep hurting people. I gripped my coffee cup tighter, my mind already starting to form a plan. If Grace thought I would back down, she had picked the wrong person. I used to believe in kindness. Now I believe in justice and the truth. And I was about to use both to bring her into the light. When I stepped out of the cafe with Dana, my head was spinning with all the information. Her story didn't just confirm that Grace had used the same tactics to destroy someone else. It made it clear. What I'd experienced was just a small piece of the wreckage Grace had left behind. I knew I needed more than stories. I needed proof, and no one was better at that than Mike, the private investigator I had hired before. I called him right from the car, still parked by the curb, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Mike, I said, my voice low but firm. I need you to find everything you can on Grace. Her past, finances, legal issues, old relationships, everything. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then he replied, voice raspy as always. You really want to know it all, Sarah? Even the things that might make you stop seeing her as a regular person? I passed the point of calling her a person, I said, eyes locked on the steering wheel. Mike gave a quiet chuckle. All right, give me 3 days. I hung up and took a deep breath. Then I called Charles. He'd picked up after just 2 rings. Sarah? I need your help, I said directly. I think it's time we joined forces. About Grace? His voice dropped. About everything. Andrew, my career, and the people Grace has already hurt. Charles was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said something I'll never forget. Tell me what you need. I'll do it all. 3 days later, Mike sent me a hard drive and a thick folder. I didn't open them right away. Instead, I arranged to meet Charles at an old bar on the outskirts of town, a place so quiet you could hear the ice clinking in glasses and the wind whistling outside the windows. When he arrived, I was already there, the hard drive and documents neatly placed on the table. I hope I'm overreacting, I said quietly. But you need to see this. Together, we looked through every video clip, every photo, every email Mike had uncovered. There was traffic cam footage showing Grace near the scene of a so-called stalking incident she'd reported, photos of her leaving the law office she once accused of harassment, holding a thick envelope, copies of legal documents. Grace had once been sued for defamation but quietly settled out of court. Charles stared at the screen, his face paling. She's been doing this for how long? Since before I even met Andrew, I said, eyes still scanning the documents. And not just once, not just one victim. I handed him a printed statement from Dana, along with photo ID confirmation and case details. Charles flipped through the pages as if they weighed a ton. I always thought I raised my daughter right, he murmured, voice cracking. I didn't know how to comfort him, because honestly, I still couldn't understand how someone like Grace had manipulated so many people for so long, without anyone brave enough to stop her. We need a way to bring this truth into the open, I said after a long silence. Not for revenge. To protect others. Charles nodded. And where do we start? I looked him straight in the eye. A confrontation, with witnesses and the truth laid out on the table. I told him the plan forming in my head. A family gathering, under the pretense of resolving misunderstandings, inviting both Andrew and Grace, and letting everything unfold in the light, with nowhere left to hide. Charles was quiet, then let out a dry chuckle. You're sharp. But are you sure Grace will come? I'll make sure she can't refuse. I pulled out my phone and sent Grace a short message. We need to talk. Just us. No Sarah. Less than a minute later, she replied. Where? When? I smiled. Luring the fish had never been the hard part. The hard part was when the fish didn't realize. The hook was barbed this time. And I wasn't trembling anymore. That Saturday afternoon, the Oregon sky was gray, heavy with clouds but no rain. The air was strangely still and thick. I stepped into Andrew's family's old house, the same place where we had our first Christmas together, and my chest felt heavy. Every corner was familiar, but today, everything had changed. This time, I wasn't arriving as a daughter-in-law. I was here to expose the truth. Charles, who had stood by me throughout the past days, stood in the center of the living room, having arranged everything meticulously as if it were just another family gathering. Linda, Andrew's mother, sat quietly on a chair, her face pale. Rachel, my best friend, and Dana, who had once been Grace's victim, were both there too, each holding documents, their expressions resolute. Everyone had been briefed. Stay silent, observe, and let me lead. Around 6 o'clock, Grace and Andrew arrived, walking in like they still had everything under control. Grace wore a pale pink dress, her smile far too bright. Andrew looked tired and tense, his eyes avoiding mine. Good, everyone's here, Charles said in his steady voice. Let's sit down and talk like a family. Grace glanced at me with a smug half-smile. Oh, finally someone acting like an adult. I didn't respond. I simply pulled out a chair, opened the folder in front of me, and looked her straight in the eyes. Grace, I began, my voice strangely calm. Today, we're not here to talk about personal feelings, blame, or excuses. We're only going to talk about the truth. Grace let out a small laugh. Sarah, what kind of drama are you trying to stage now? I opened the folder. I'll ask, and if you don't answer, I'll present the evidence. I placed the first photo on the table, a picture of Grace leaving the law office she once accused of harassment, holding a thick envelope in her hand. 8 months ago, you accused a lawyer of misconduct. Do you remember that case? Grace froze. That has nothing to do with this. I'm not asking if it's related, I'm asking if you remember it. She didn't reply. I continued. I have a letter from the building manager confirming you visited multiple times, always leaving with the same envelope. And here's a copy of his account statement showing regular refunds in the 2 weeks that followed. Linda gasped. Charles clenched the arms of his chair. Andrew kept his head down, shoulders tense. I placed the next item, a traffic cam video showing Grace, coincidentally, being followed after a breakup, then accusing her ex of stalking. I also have his statement. And police evidence that you yourself sent the anonymous letters claiming to be the stalker. You're making this up, Grace cried out, her face pale. I'm not making it up. Mike did. And Mike's a private investigator, not a fiction writer. I slid the next folder toward her. Dana's testimony, complete with a notarized confirmation. And this is Dana, the woman you tried to destroy with doctored photos. She lost her job, nearly lost custody of her child, but she's brave enough to sit here today. Grace turned, glaring at Dana, but Dana didn't flinch. She sat tall, eyes calm. For the first time, I saw Grace falter. Her hands trembled slightly, lips pressed tight, and her eyes darted like she was looking for an escape. Then, unexpectedly, Andrew spoke. Grace. Is it true? Grace turned to him. I told you Sarah's making all of this up to ruin us. No, Andrew cut her off, for the first time looking directly into her eyes. Is it true? The things she said? Did you do all of that? Grace stood up, snapping. You don't trust me? After everything? Andrew was silent. Then he said slowly but clearly, I trusted you. For far too long. No one said a word. Grace looked around, stunned, as if searching for someone to take her side, but everyone had turned their backs. No one believed her anymore. And she knew it. You don't understand anything, Grace screamed, slamming her hand on the table. I only did what I had to do to survive. No, I said, standing, eyes locked on her. You did all of this for one reason. You can't stand to see other people happy. Grace stepped back, then turned, heading for the door. Andrew stood now too. I'm not going with you. She spun around like she'd been slapped. Andrew. I lost my wife because of you, he said, voice cracking. I lost my family, my career, people's trust. And now, I realize you never loved me. You just wanted to win. Grace said nothing. She just looked at him, her eyes empty, then turned and walked out without a word. The room was silent. I closed my eyes for a second. And when I opened them, I knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a different life. One that no longer included Grace. 3 weeks after that final confrontation, I received an email from HR. The subject line was just 4 words. Internal investigation completed. I sat still for a few seconds, feeling like my heart had dropped into my stomach. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked. The message was brief but carried weight. We have determined the allegations to be unfounded. All submitted materials were sent from unverified anonymous addresses. Additionally, cross-checking with internal data revealed no misconduct on the part of Ms. Sarah Bennett. We sincerely apologize for the disruption and welcome you back to work starting next week. HR has also recommended you for promotion consideration in the next quarter. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The chaos had passed, leaving behind a solid ground where I could begin again, steady, untouched by manipulation. News about Grace, or what remained of her reputation, spread like wildfire. After that meeting, Dana officially filed a lawsuit with full evidence. Soon after, 2 other women from Seattle came forward, victims of Grace's past schemes. Social media posts began circulating with headlines like, Two-faced woman, the real face behind a master manipulator of families and careers. Fake entrepreneur and a trail of victims across states. Grace disappeared from social media. Her phone number stopped working. Word was she left Oregon and went into hiding in a small town in Southern California, far from anywhere that knew her name. And Andrew? He lost his job just days after the meeting, partly due to the personal scandal, partly because questionable money transfers to Grace surfaced during an internal audit. The company didn't announce a reason, just one sentence in the staff memo. We are terminating the employment contract under confidentiality terms. Charles, Andrew's father, no longer speaks to him. Linda cut ties as well. Even his closest friends quietly distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a man who betrayed his wife for an affair with his own sister. I heard he's staying in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Gresham, living off credit cards day by day. He sent a few old messages afterward. Long apologies, promises to change, even begging to come back. But I never replied. Not out of anger, but because I had moved past the point of needing to forgive. I returned to work with a new attitude. No more shrinking back, no more playing nice to keep the peace. I spoke up, stood my ground, and amazingly, people listened. The following month, I was officially promoted to project director. At a small celebration, my boss raised a glass and said, "Sarah, you're not just efficient. You're unbreakable." I smiled, not out of pride, but because I had finally found myself again. That June, I booked a solo trip to Florence, Italy. Not to run away, but to reclaim what grace could never steal from me: freedom, identity, and peace. I spent mornings watching the Arno River, afternoons wandering cobbled alleys, evenings sipping red wine on the hotel rooftop, watching golden lights sweep over the old rooftops. I journaled every day, sometimes just one sentence. Today I felt light. I didn't try to forget what happened. I just learned how to look back without letting it hurt anymore. Grace took many things, but not my will. Andrew betrayed me, but never stole my faith in myself. And the people who once doubted me, now they look at me with respect. I don't need their apologies. I just need them to know. Sarah Bennett stood up, moved on, and she's never looking back. One chapter has closed, and I, with a healed heart, am writing a new one. Free, radiant, and entirely mine. Life taught me a harsh lesson. Sometimes the ones you trust most are the ones who push you over the edge. But I didn't let the pain define me. I learned to rise, to reclaim my voice, and to live by my values. The losses that once broke me became the fuel that made me stronger. I didn't choose revenge. I chose truth. I chose light. And from there, I kept moving forward, no longer afraid, no longer bound, completely free. What do you think of Sarah's story and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional true stories and powerful life lessons about family.